been started in 2009 in the case of China, and consider human rights as divisible. They always consider socio-economic rights as priority rather than the civil and political rights. So, for example, they have this clear prioritization of the socio-economic rights. Their way of considering human rights has been of huge debate in the global platform also, because they consider human rights as a Western concept, and they said that human rights in the Asian context is different. There is a differences of Asian values and human rights. Now, at least they have accepted the universality of human rights from 2009 onwards. That's something of a positive sign that we should take into account. But still, they have not signed, or they have signed but not ratified the civil and political rights. So they have been prioritizing the socio-economic rights of the people. They always promoted the hierarchy of socio-economic rights as primary, and the civil and political rights as a secondary. And they don't accept the universal concept of human rights with regard. They say that you cannot have the same system of human rights with every country. There should be differences according to their nature of their history, culture, and traditions. And second is development paradigm. Now again, it's all are related in the sense that they have created this development paradigm in a sense and have this solidarity with the developing world. They said that human rights cannot be same everywhere. It should be evaluated according to its level of development in that particular country. So that means you cannot have same system of human rights everywhere. Although that sometimes have the backing of the developing world and also of some repressive regimes who have been downplaying the human rights and promoting development agenda as a primary target. And then the other thing is the focus on the rights of the many, in the sense that they consider collective rights of its people and the state as primary and the individual rights as secondary. Now this is the stand that they have been taking for quite long, in the sense the state has a duty to protect its people as a community, but they have not categorically stated like not giving individual rights, but in the sense that they have always promoted the rights of many people compared to the individual rights. Now the next one is stability as precondition for the development rights. They always have this, rhetoric that state stability is primary, and even they have used this excuse during the Tiananmen killings that states' interests are primary, none of those separatist activities or those other elements in the society. Then, now one more is the tactical usage of economic might. Now they have been using this economic might in every bilateral or multilateral meetings, and then negating the importance of human rights in terms of trade deals, or as we all know that China has been playing major roles in Europe or in US in 2008, and now in Europe with the economic recession. Now, next part is, now where does the situation in Tibet stand in all this messy global affairs? UN General Assembly passed resolution in 1959, 61 and 65 to respect the human rights of Tibetans, and even stated the self-determination of Tibetans should be respected in 1961 and also in 1965. But at the same time, we need to consider that at that time, PRC, as in People's Republic of China, was not a member of General Assembly. So sometimes we think that now that was some victory, and not now. At that time, PRC was not a member. And even the UN Human Rights Commission, or Commission on Human Rights, passed resolution in 1991. And because 1991 was a period, late 90s, 89, after the Tiananmen killing, there was a huge setback for China in the Human Rights Commission, and there were several resolutions passed, and even one passed for Tibet. And in 1995 there was another attempt, but at that time, as I told you earlier, after the 1991, late 90s, they began to assert itself as a major player in the global affairs, more so in the human rights system, UN system, and particularly human rights system. And now, with more assertive China and smart usage of its economic powers, Western countries fail to raise Tibet issue at the appropriate level. Now, this is a fact in the sense that now, because of the economic might that China have, it is very difficult embarrassing for some state leaders to express its concern for Tibet. That's unfortunate, but it's a reality. And besides that, as a researcher, I felt that it's also it's not only economic might, but other states, especially the US, UK, are dependent on China on key other issues. They bargain each other in the sense that, okay, you support me on North Korea, I won't raise something like it. Not deliberately, but there is a bargaining going on. You support me on Libya, and I won't. You don't veto this motion in the Security Council, I will support something like that in return. So these are something that bargaining goes on. That's a global politics, as we all know. And another thing is there's a lack of coordination among the Western countries to press China. Some leaders say something and some other leaders, they're not prepared, there's no coordinate, there's no planning in the sense to how to raise not only the Tibet issue, but Uyghur and other ethnic minorities, Falun Gong practitioners. There's no coordinated effort by the Western countries. And then China's principle of non-interference, sovereignty, stability, that's rhetoric has been playing for so long that everyone knows, but at the same time has been now, sometimes they have been present for so long that now people are beginning to understand and accept that notion of non-interference, and especially the backing of some of the developing countries and the huge investments in Africa. So there's a very grim chance in the UN General Assembly supporting, and sometimes it has become a reality in the sense that non-interference, sovereignty and state stability are in fact more important. Now, at the end of the day, is human rights a reality? Can we achieve human rights? Not only in China, but around the world. So basic thing is there is a lack of political will in terms of, for example, in China, there is no political will to respect the human rights. There is not a single leader came out and spoke for reform, unless once or twice in the former Prime Minister, Premier Wen Jiabao talked about reform, but no concrete will from the Chinese leadership. And there's a because of that, there's a weak institutional framework. There's no proper grievances. You cannot have, if you have grievances, there's no place to go, where to go, and there's a lack of access to justice. It's all the communist cadre or communist party members or communist leaders who just appoint directly to the judges. So there's a lack of access to justice. There's no independence of judiciary. And there's opposition to human rights abroad. Now, one thing is because of its own human rights record, they indirectly encourages the human rights abuses in other countries, whether it's in North Korea, in Sudan, or in Iran. So sometimes it's becoming a trend that you don't oppose the human rights situation violations abroad, so you can abuse his rights in your own country. Now, another thing is China's strategy to put socio-economic rights ahead of civil and political rights will lead other repressive regime and developing countries to follow suit. Now, that's something that majority of the developing countries are now claiming that, okay, leave aside human rights. First, we need to have economic rights. So this is the concept that I talked earlier about human rights being indivisible. So they have been saying human rights can be divided in terms of socio-economic rights and civil and political rights, whereas the rights groups or every majority of the other Western countries claim the universality of human rights and human rights being indivisible. And what next for China? Now, China's rise in the global affairs and in the UN human rights system can be summarized into being indifference to engagement to dominance. Now, first, when they entered the United Nations system and the UN Human Rights, at that time, Commission on Human Rights, and then the Human Rights Council, they just become observer. They didn't take stand. Now, and after their rise because of the economic rise, they started engaging more, and then now they are being dominant in the global politics and playing their economic might in dictating terms in other countries' foreign affairs. And it can be summed up as they will always play their games accordingly as seen in the past, because when you look back into their foreign policy in terms of UN human rights system, it's not, except for the non-interference, there have been so many changes. And they have been actively engaging with the UN system, but with caution. And unlike some of the other countries, China has been very active in the UN Human Rights Council. They are very receptive of the questions, but at the same time they give answers, but still they are engaging with the UN system. And most importantly, it will depend on the world economic order. Now that's a reality, and actions of its own Chinese citizens in the mainland. Now these two will, if these two changes, then there would be a huge change in the Chinese approaches toward the human rights. Now, falling prey to Chinese bargaining trick, that's not understandable, but we all know it's reality. And also one other thing is Chinese preference to bilateral dialogue than multilateral dialogue. We all know that, because when it comes to the Southeast China Sea, South China Sea, all those affected areas, they want to have a bilateral dialogue with China, but China doesn't seem to be too interested in the same. And they have been always trying to have a bilateral dialogue, not multilateral dialogue, because at that time they can use their own, might, force, in the sense that you can have trade agreements with me, or do you want to have agreement with me or no one else, or something like that. So that's why China has been avoiding multilateral dialogue more than ever. I think that's it as of now. If you have any questions or any clarity, or if I'm being too fast. Yeah.
Could you relate some of what you've said, particularly since the 2009 review, to the situation with Tibet, and how Tibet may have been, the issues of Tibet may have been raised in the Human Rights Council, and what was China's response and other nations' response?
In 2009, interestingly, after the economic recession in the US, there were quite good support in respect to Tibet's issue during the UPR, Universal Periodic Review. That's what you're referring to, 2009. And at that time, many of the countries raised so many issues and also recommended so many proposals or ways to improve the human rights situations in Tibet, particularly some European countries, Czech Republic, Australia, and New Zealand, Poland, so many other countries, UK, US. They raised important issues, but at the same time, all the recommendations were, they didn't accept the recommendations. But at the same time, they have issued this National Human Rights Action Plan in 2009. And when you look into that action plan, it has been quite clear in the sense that there have been, again, the rhetoric that all the ethnic minorities enjoy the equal rights. There have been, freedom of religion to practice and believe in one's religion. So there has been rhetoric going on, but the thing is, the situation has worsened rather than to improve. So that's why the UPR session this October is vital in the sense to held accountable to its own pledges that was made in the action plan. That's something that we didn't ask you to do that, but you just said you will do that. So why don't you? So that's something that we want to hold accountable to with regard to China's review. And unfortunately, I don't know how this would turn up in the real sense that in the UPR session in October, but we are still working hard toward it in raising those issues.
And let's say those issues are raised, and the Chinese Human Rights Action Plan in relation to Tibet, the rhetoric on the equality of ethnic minorities has not been good, the issue has not been good, and then these countries, Australia, US and so on, make recommendations again, and then the Chinese say, okay, we don't accept your recommendation. Is there any system in the Human Rights Council that can force the issue with China, or they just say, oh, well, it's in process?
Now, there's a working group after the UPR which compiles all the recommendations, what they do, and then they have to report to the UN Human Rights Council. At the end of the day, there's these 47 countries from across the world divided equally among the regions, which have the final say what actions will they take. Now, as from some quarters of the human rights activists, they sometimes raise issues with aiming or doubting the credibility of the whole system. Now that sometimes, I don't know whether it can be correctly said whether it's black or white, but there is sometimes question raised in the sense that what next? That's what you were raising. So at the end of the day, there's 47 member countries in the UN Human Rights Council who has the last say, and as a responsible state, they have the last moral obligation to do so, especially with regard to Human Rights Council, because when you enter the Human Rights Council or you stand in for the election to be a member of the Human Rights Council, you have to make pledges or you have to promise and you have to show your record that your human rights record is good. Even China's this year is not the member of the Human Rights Council, but it's coming up next year. So these elections also gonna held in November in UN, New York, in UN General Assembly, where China would appear herself as a candidature for the next Human Rights Council, and that's also an opportunity for other countries to, raise these issues or stop China from being a member of the UN Human Rights Council. But unfortunately, China is the lone candidature from Asia at this time, so that's automatically, I guess.
The only one.
Yeah. There's no rival candidature.
I was wondering if you could speak to if there's any difference between Xi Jinping's regime and Hu Jintao, and maybe it seems the situation in Tibet is just as bad, but maybe in mainland China, if there have been any changes.
I don't know, it's a bit early to comment on it, but at the same time, I don't know about the reform being, proposed, but at the same time, there is this resurgence of patriotic towards your communism. That's something that I don't see very good sign, because they have been trying to build better communist party, how you strengthen your party membership. That's something that is normally against what the human rights mechanism that we hope for. So that's not a good sign that I see. And with regard to other reforms, I haven't heard or seen anything, concrete, plans or any action plans. Unlike in past, when Jiabao spoke about reforms, there was, at least he's a premier of the People's Republic of China. There was a good sign at that point of time, but as of now, it's too early to comment on that. But there's one thing is there is this plan of strengthening their party. So that's something not a good sign, I presume.
But they did make education reforms, didn't they, with allowing more Chinese students to study in the States? They signed an agreement. I think like 10,000 students can study in America. Is that?
I think in US it's already the largest number of foreign students is Chinese, so I'm sure there have been lots of Chinese students there. But I don't know concretely about what you raised.